Who has the better claw, Von Raschke or the Von Erichs?
Larry, you make one serious mistake. Fritz von Erich invented the claw, yes? Baron von Raschke perfected the claw. I took it to a higher plane. In my hand, it is the brain claw. It is a scientific hold, applying pressures to the nerves that run down the side of the skull and penetrate the cranium. And I have been through the fire, and what the fire doesn't destroy, it hardens! And I am hardened, and I am tough, young, tender David Von Erich, come to kill and feel the claw, the brain claw.
Professional wrestling has always needed villains. For every Hulk Hogan, there had to be someone in the opposite corner for the crowd to boo and hate. In the 1970s, few villains were more terrifying than Baron von Raschke, a goose-stepping German heel whose dreaded claw struck fear into audiences across the country. Children cried when he raised his hand, and adults paid good money to see heroes escape his grip. Yet today, his name is barely mentioned alongside wrestling's legends. As wrestling entered its national television-driven boom in the mid-1980s, Raschke's character suddenly seemed dated, leaving him largely forgotten in the mainstream. His story shows both the power and the limitations of wrestling gimmicks. He was a pioneer of theatrics in the ring, but he was also a victim of the sport's constant evolution. Born James Raschke, the man who became Baron von Raschke was not just another performer in tights. He was a legitimate athlete, a top-level amateur wrestler who made the U.S. Olympic team. At the University of Nebraska, he was a 3-year letterman on the Cornhuskers wrestling team from 1960 through 1962. He also played football as a left tackle for them in 1959 and 1960, proving himself as a versatile competitor. After his amateur wrestling success and a stint in the U.S. Army, Raschke turned to professional wrestling, where his legitimate athletic background gave credibility to the larger-than-life character he would soon portray. After a short training stint with Vern Gagne in the Twin Cities, Raschke entered professional wrestling in 1966, starting out as a referee in the American Wrestling Association. Before long, he stepped into the ring under his real name, but he quickly realized he needed more than technical skill to stand out. After a brief run under his real name, Raschke traveled to Canada, where a meeting with Mad Dog Vachon changed the course of his career. Mad Dog encouraged him to lean into the role of a villain, and that's when James transformed into Baron von Raschke. With his thick, exaggerated German accent, goose-stepping theatrics, and menacing threats to his opponents, the Baron was born. The act was broad, it was theatrical, and it worked. What made the Baron stand out was his finishing move, the claw. Raschke would raise his hand high, stalk his opponent, and then clamp down on their head, face, or midsection with an iron grip. Kids in the crowd screamed, adults leaned forward in their seats, and baby faces did everything in their power to fight out of it. Wrestling in that era was built on black and white storytelling, and the Baron was a master at giving crowds a villain to despise. When you bought a ticket to see Dusty Rhodes, you wanted to see him do the elbow. When you bought a ticket to see Raschke, you wanted to see someone finally escape the claw. By the mid-1970s, Baron von Raschke had carved out a reputation as one of wrestling's most dependable villains, piling up singles and tag team titles across the NWA and AWA territories. He wasn't just a regional act either. Raschke also made his way into the bright lights of the WWWF. His dreaded claw was so notorious that television broadcasts would throw a massive red X across the screen whenever he applied it, as if the hold was too violent for fans at home to witness. Under the guidance of classy Freddie Blassie, Raschke's biggest moment came in March 1977 at Madison Square Garden, where he went toe-to-toe with Bruno Sammartino for the World Championship. The image of Raschke clawing at Sammartino's head while the champion was tangled in the ropes was as dramatic as anything the company produced that decade. The Baron lost that night by disqualification after shoving the referee, but the feud was important enough to earn a rematch the very next month. Sammartino came out on top in the rematch, his final title defense before dropping the belt to superstar Billy Graham. But Raschke had proved he could hang with one of the biggest icons in the history of the sport. The Baron was everything American audiences loved to hate. He goose-stepped to the ring, barked in a heavy faux German accent, and threatened opponents with ominous warnings of destruction. His act was broad, theatrical, and laced with the post-World War II anxieties that wrestling promoters knew would rile up a crowd. Even after his WWWF run, Raschke remained a fixture in wrestling throughout the 1980s. He returned to the AWA, where his name value made him a natural fit for both singles competition and tag teams. By then, the goose-step and the claw had become almost campy, but that was part of his enduring charm. Fans booed him, yes, but they also knew exactly what to expect. Loud threats, wild mannerisms, and the dreaded hand that could end a match in seconds. Like many wrestlers of his generation, Baron von Raschke eventually faded from the spotlight as wrestling entered the flashy, neon-soaked era of the WWF's national expansion. Hulk Hogan and larger-than-life cartoon characters took over, while older villains like Raschke became reminders of a different, more theatrical style of wrestling. When the AWA finally folded in 1991, Raschke didn't disappear from the business right away. Instead, he kept working smaller independent promotions, especially in his home state of Minnesota, where his name still carried weight with loyal fans. Though no longer in the national spotlight, he remained a draw on the local scene, embodying the kind of regional star that defined wrestling before Vince McMahon's WWF expansion. Raschke finally hung up his boots in 1995, ending a career that had stretched across 3 decades. When he wasn't wrestling, Raschke lived a much quieter life than his on-screen persona suggested. Away from the ring, he worked as a substitute teacher, trading in the goose steps and menacing glare for lesson plans and chalkboards. It was a reminder that behind the outlandish villain was a grounded, hard-working man who valued community and family as much as performance. Even in retirement, Raschke never fully left the spotlight. When he wasn't appearing at small local shows or working as a substitute teacher, he found new life as the subject of theater. In April 2007, he starred in The Baron, a stage play co-written by Corey McLeod and his son Carl Raschke. Running for several months at the Minnesota History Theater, the play explored how such a soft-spoken, polite man could create one of wrestling's most hated villains, a character so despised that he often had to literally fight his way back to the locker room. The play became the foundation for a later film about his life and career, The Claw, directed by Phil Harder and written by Carl Raschke. Both the stage play and the film revealed the truth fans rarely got to see. Behind the goose steps and the threats, Baron von Raschke was a thoughtful, humble man who simply understood how to play the role of a villain better than almost anyone of his time. Baron von Raschke represents a key piece of wrestling history. He was part of the bridge between serious athletic competition and the theatrical sports entertainment spectacle that wrestling became. His over-the-top promos and character work showed how far wrestling could push theatrics without losing its edge. Without villains like Raschke paving the way, there's no Iron Sheik, no Volkov, no line of foreign heels for Hulk Hogan to vanquish on his way to superstardom. Even today, Raschke is remembered fondly in Minnesota, where he was one of the AWA's most recognizable stars, and still an icon in the area. Baron von Raschke might not be a household name like Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair, but in the 1970s, he was as good a villain as wrestling could offer. He terrified children, entertained adults, and gave heroes the perfect foil to fight against. He deserves to be remembered as one of wrestling's great villains, one who defined his time, even if he was left behind by the next era. And if the Baron himself were here to close the story, he'd probably say what he always said: "Dad is all the people need to know."